I'm very happy to present the project Hence Digital here. I will read my script. And so I start with my presentation. Everything is fine. So, at the beginning, I would like to say some words about the title. The passage from analog to digital in the title of my paper is rather autobiographical. It alludes to the studies on the correspondences of the composer Hans Werner Henze, carried out with different methodologies and aims in two phases of my life. About 7 years ago, I started my research on Henze's correspondences in at the Paul Sacher Foundation in Basel. There, I was able to consult the original letters with a direct examination of the materials, and I could transcribe them and investigate the compositional process of an opera by Henze for my master thesis at the University of Bologna. The second phase is the present one, in which for just over 2 years, I have been working on the digital edition of the same materials that I had consulted in the past within the research project Digital Letter Edition, Hans Werner Henze's network of artists. The short version is Hans Digital, and the even shorter version is Handy. Project director is Professor Antje Tumat. Working with me in the team are the musicologist Irmin Capelle, digital humanist Dennis Reed, and the student assistant Sophie Stremel. The project, based at the musicology seminar at Detmold, Paderborn University, is funded by the DFG, German Research Foundation, for a duration of 3 years until July 2024. We also cooperate with the research group called the FIVE, Virtual Research Network EDIROM, that deals precisely with digital music editions. My double experience, analog as a young scholar in the archive and digital within the project, allowed me to directly understand the possibilities of a digital approach for musicological research and specifically for the analysis of well-connected artistic networks. In today's talk, I would like to take a few glances at the digital edition, hence digital, and reflect on the potential and that encoding correspondences and the encoded documents themselves can have for musicological research. On this slide, on the left, you can see the screenshots of the title page of the website on which we publish Henze's correspondences. Here, a quote from Henze appears at the top, emphasizing a distinctive aspect of Henze aesthetics, namely his going beyond the norm, his thinking outside the box, and his not being able to be defined in a specific musical trends or currents. To introduce you to Henze's voice, I now play a few seconds from the interview from which this sentence is taken.
Schön ist eigentlich nur das, was von der Norm abweicht, würde ich sagen. Michelangelos Malerei und Bildhauerkunst ist deswegen schön, weil sie von der Norm abweicht. Und die Musik von Mozart ist auch deswegen so schön, weil sie von der Norm abweicht, weil sie anormal ist, über die Norm weit hinausgeht.
Hans Werner Henze was an important composer of the 20th century. He composed 28 operas, 11 ballets, 39 pieces of vocal music, 46 pieces for orchestra and instrumental ensembles, including 10 symphonies, 20 concertos, 112 pieces of chamber music, including 5 quartets and 30 soundtracks for film. In addition to his rich oeuvre, he has written numerous essays, and edited a books series on aspects of musical aesthetics, written work journals, and autobiography now translated into many different languages, and also many letters. He preserved and entrusted most of his correspondences to the Paul Sacher Foundation. The curator of the Hense collection at the Paul Sacher Foundation, Dr. Simon Obert, reported that as many as 30 linear meters of Hense's correspondences are stored there. Hense's letters correspondences include not only letters, handwritten or typed, but also telegrams and postcards, as well as documents that were sometimes attached to letters such as reviews, theater program, etc. The letters kept in the Paul Sacher Foundation are mostly those that Hense had received, and also copies of letter he typed on carbon paper because he wanted to preserve some letters for archival purposes. The letter that he had sent are in the recipient's archives and collection, partly not easily accessible and located on different continents. Although many of his writings have been published, most of the letters he exchanged with significant personalities of the 20th century are not. They can only be found in archives or private collection. An exception are the correspondences between Hense and Karl Amadeus and Elisabeth Hartmann, and between Hense and Ingeborg Bachmann, both of which have been published in book form. The team of the Hense Digital project has been working on the first digital edition of correspondences between Hense and Grete Weil and Walter Jokic, Hense and Winston Hugh Oden and Chester Kalman, Hense and Hans Magnus Enzensberger, and this correspondence is already published, was published in September this year. Between Hense and Miguel Barnett will be published next spring, and Hense Hitze published this month, and the last one between Hense and Paul Sacher. Why correspondences? So why a digital edition specifically of correspondences? So letter constitute private texts not produced for publication, but rather realized as a medium to convey a message, mostly confidentially, between two or sometimes three or four interlocutors. These documents become primary sources rich in significant information when interrogated on the basis of research questions and a methodology that takes into account their nature, that is, containing texts produced in a private context to which the scholar consulting them does not belong. Since correspondences are primary sources for research, encoding them in a digital edition means encoding a cultural object. To recall a title of the joint MECTI conference in Paderborn some months ago, encoding lectures means encoding culture. In a more specific sense, hence, the correspondences offer insight in the most intimate world of his affections, concerns, fame, and position in the art world, and also contain important reflection on his activities as a composer and musician, on the political and cultural history of the second half of the 20th century. For musicological research, the postal documents specifically constitute precious sources for the investigation of the genesis, development, and reception of his often collective musical works. In the Hanse Digital project, letter encoding is carried out according to the guidelines of the Text Encoding Initiative, TI. In our project, the specific schema, that is the set of rules that we use to encode documents, is developed by our digital humanist, Dennis Reed, according to the TI rules and to the needs of the project. Our scheme, however, while referring to the general rules of the TI consortium, adapts them using a TI customization developed by Peter Stadler in another digital edition, the Karl Maria von Weber Gesamtausgabe. This process of subsequent use of a TI schema is carried out by means of a technology that is called ODD chaining. The use of the Vega customization by the Hands Digital project in the Hands Digital project is not so simple and straightforward, but still requires adaptation work. It's necessary to take also into account that between there are 140 years between Weber and Hense, and the writing technologies are evidently different. In addition to this, the Hands Digital project also take advantages of the Vega project with regard to the so-called web app that allows files encoded in the XML markup language to be displayed on the website, and also with regard to the web design. It is interesting to see how, in the course of the work, not only the Hands Digital project exploits the Vega edition, but also the Vega edition can be enriched in the light of the Hands project's proposals. In this sense, productive collaborations are thus developed. After the brief introduction to the research project, I would like to outline the potential of a digital edition for musicological research in four different aspects: the temporal aspect, the spatial aspect, relational aspect, and thematic aspect. To do this, I consider as an example the threefold correspondence between Hense and his librettist, Winston Hugh Auden, and Chester Kallman. The correspondence between them are kept in two separate folders at the Paul Sacker Foundation under the correspondences of the Hense collection. Oren and Kalman were a couple from 1932 until Oden's death and worked closely on many artistic projects as a team. Since Oden and Kalman lived together, Hans often addressed his letter to both librettists. Both usually signed their own letters to Hans, which may have been sent individually. So thematically, all three were closely involved in the process of creating two opera, Elegy for Young Lovers and The Bastards. In our edition, the letter from Oden and Kalman to Hans are considered as a unit. The digital edition allows an overview of the temporal development of correspondence and of the chain of communication. It is possible to view in a chronological order all the letters that Oden and Kalman and Hense exchanged. If you decide to read a particular letter, as in this case, you can immediately see through a tool called context which postal document precedes and follows it. It is possible to know which document precedes or follows the letter, either in the absolute chronological context, that is, of all the letters published in our website, or in the chronological direct context, that is, of all that is related to the specific correspondence. This can be very useful to know not only the topics dealt with by the three authors, but also to know what context Hense had at the same historical moment and what topics he may have dealt with other people. These tools works because of the metadata that are embedded in each XML document. If you take a look at the XML preview that is also published on the website, as is generally the case with digital editions, you will find this information contained in the element of the correspondence description. Here it is indicated by whom the letter is written and by whom it is received, as well as where and when. Sometimes the date is not written by the author, then it is necessary to reconstruct it through the contents of the letter itself. To make it clear to users that the date has been found by the editor, we can use in the element date the type editor, while in the body of the letter itself, it is specified that the date has been found by the editor with the element supplied. In the web rendition, the date is then placed in square brackets. Unfortunately, only letters preserved by Hense have survived, namely those he had received from Oden and Kalman, and those written by himself that he had preserved through carbon copy. All letters by Hense that have survived in the Oden Kalman Hense are preserved typewritten, so as carbon copies. This is why editors have to deal with incompleteness. The edition also creates metadata of documents that are certain to have been part of the correspondence, but which have not found to date. This is the case with the first letter Hense sent to the two libertists. Hense mentions this letter in his autobiography and writes that in December 1958 he wrote to Oden in New York asking him in all humility whether he would like to work with him on an opera with or without Kalman. Given the certainty of the existence of these documents, we decided to create an XML document for this letter only with the metadates because we don't know the content. From this example, we can see how a digital edition can account for the gaps and the missing materiality. The edition is open access, also in the XML file, and its metadata will be fed into letter databases such as Corresp Search, a web service that brings together metadata from different editions. The correspondence documents also the many trips of the three authors between Europe and New York, the main residence of the two libertists, as well as within Europe. Cities such as Berlin, Salzburg, where the three attended performances, or Oxford, where Oden taught, or Athens, where Kalman had a love affair with some members of the Royal Greek Life Guard, or Kirchstetten, where Oden and Kalman had their summer residence, are mentioned in this correspondence. The postal addresses of the documents also reveal, for example, that although Oden was living in Berlin in the winter of 1964 as artist in residence of the Ford Foundation, he was in New York in December. So the geographical movements of the three authors are clearly documented by means of place, cities, region, and the state's identifiers. The places where the letters are written are sometimes named already next to the date, although not always. In this case, this letter, places are also given in correspondence description. As many as 75 places are named in this correspondence alone. It is possible to view all of them in an index. Let's take a look to the city Forio d'Ischia. Hense met Oden and Kalman for the first time in the summer of 1951 in this village for Rio, located in the west of the island. The Libertist couple lived in New York, but spent their summer vacations on the island of Ischia in Italy for 10 years. As can be seen from the XML preview of the city of Forio, this one is coming, yeah. The editor notes not only the place name, but also the identifier in the GeoNames geographical database. Through this identifier, our digital edition benefits from context from other websites, such as Wikipedia, thereby increasing information about this city that could be relevant for to the user. Moreover, it's possible to search for places within each letter by means of a search tool that allows to highlight all the places that are named. Forio is mentioned, for example, in the first letter from the Liberties to Hense. However, in this letter, Forio became an imaginary town in which the plot of a possible opera to be developed together will be set. The Libertist Oden wrote in this letter, "Delight to get your letter. Chester and I would love to collaborate with you on an opera, provided we can earn some money thereby." What would you say to this idea? A reincarnation of the Daphne's Chloe story set in imaginary for you in about 1910. Sometimes the author of a letter alludes to a place that is not explicitly stated. In this case, the editor has to deal with a certain ambiguity. The editor can also give information about places in a commentary, above all in these cases. For example, Hense wrote in a letter, "Looking forward to seeing you both." It could be very interesting to know where he would meet the two libertists, and thanks to the synergy with another digital edition of letters, the Oden Musulin papers, it was possible to discover that Hense would have met Oden and Kalman in Kirstetten from the 4 to 6 August 1960. Evidence of his visit is in fact an entry in the guest book of the Libertist, to this day preserved in the collection of the Harry Remsen Center in Texas, in which Hense wrote, "With love and gratitude and pride to have such a beautiful libretto." The digital edition makes possible to investigate Hense's artistic network. To investigate the investigation of Hense's relationships can either be internal to the correspondence, in case one wants to study the relationship between Hense, Oden, and Kalman, or external, focusing the relationship between the three authors with other personalities. For example, directors, philologists, translators, designer who circle around the development of their creative processes. The correspondence between Oren, Kalman, and Hense shows that Hense's relationship with the Anglo-American couple was characterized by great respect and esteem from the very beginning. Hense was 19 years younger than Oden and 5 years younger than Kalman. And he describes how the Libertist team functioned. We had in his autobiography. He had become friends during our years together on Ischia, when I had been able to gain a certain insight into the way in which he, Oden, and Kalman function as libertists. In writing their librettos, they will discuss everything as intellectual equals, a discussion that lasted all day, in the course of which they would jot down odd words and phrases. It was fascinating to be present on such occasions and listen to them at work. in a short period of time, a friendship developed that was based on equality and characterized by genuine interest in the opinion of the other person. As for places, every person in our edition is given an alphanumerical identifier number. This project internal ID is linked to entries from other databases, such as the GND. This enables to create the creation of an interconnected knowledge network. Each named person is then encoded via the first name element to which the attributes key is added, followed by the idea, such as in these cases. In the letters, persons are sometimes not explicitly named but only hinted at. Even in these cases, which are indicated in the encoding with the element referencing a string, the editors provide the key of the referred entity and the specific ID. As you can see, the first letter from Oren and Kalman um, to Hense mentions several names that are linked to IDs. Oden, Kalman, Hense, for example, or also the English writer Norman Douglas. Editors can also add information to explain the relationship between a certain person to the authors of the letters, or simply to explain why he or she is mentioned. In this case, for example, I added a comment through the element note to explain why Norman Douglas here is named. And I wrote, as Federica Marsico writes in her article, the reference to the English writer Norman Douglas, who had died only a few years early in 1952, is significant. Douglas lived in Capri, another island on the Gulf of Naples, just south of the island of Ischia, in the last period of his life, after having run into serious legal problems in England due to his homosexuality. The comments are intended to help readers of the letter to better understand the text. They are based on sources such as personal documents like autobiographies and other correspondences, musical sources, and literature, as in this case. Temporal aspects, spatial analysis, and the examination of the relational network are important for the analysis of the content of the correspondence, which I will discuss now in more detail. I would like to give you an idea on how, based on a digital edition, musicological questions and issues can be answered and investigated by taking as case studies the correspondence between Oden, Hense, and Kalman. In the first part of their letters exchange, they talk mainly about the development of the opera Elegy for Young Lovers, while in the second part of the correspondence of the opera The Bastards. The letters published in the digital edition can potentially be of interest from different research perspectives. My question in this case or as follow: how does the collaboration between Hense and his librettist work? What influences can be traced between them? Are there intrusion into the domain of the others, for example, of the composer Hense in the literary domain of the librettist, and of Oden and Kalman in the musical domain of Hense? After their first meeting in Forio, Oden, Kalman, and Hense met again and once in the summer of 1959 at Oden and Kalman's house in Kirstetten in Austria. There, Hense told them both about his musical idea for Elegy for Young Lovers. As Oden and Kalman report, Hence, wanted to write a chamber opera for a small cast and ensemble and without choir. Instruments were to accompany the characters of the opera and characterize them with their timbres, while some realistic sound elements were to mark the significant moments in the dramaturgy. In Kirchstetten, there was a continuous exchange of musical suggestion, literary additions, and cuts to the libretto, which functioned in an equal and open manner. In retrospect, Hense perceived this as an extended game of ping pong for three, with discussions ranging from the choice of names of characters and plays of action to musical tempo and the mood of scenes. The development of the libretto for Elegy for Young Lovers was accompanied by Hense's suggestions, documented in letters, and by Hense's memories of personal meetings in his autobiography. There, he reports, for example, I was pleased to see how seriously they took my requirements and the description of the music that I could hear in my own mind's air. Hense also writes about how his collaboration with the two librettists is progressing, was progressing to his friend and the librettist Ingeborg Bachmann in a letter. He wrote, "The Anglo-Americans are diligent people. Owen and Kalman have already, oh, sorry, yeah, already delivered the acts of elegy, the first of which has already been changed according to my wishes as planned. I write in the margin, instead of this cabaletta, I would prefer an inna nanna of about 2 minutes, and lullaby from your Oxford colleague comes in reply by post that goes like this. My own, the little planet flies, the snowflake falls through even colder ears. My own, upon a human cheek it dies, not in its own, but in another tear. Look what a beautiful thing and how well it sums up with the situation of the underside author of this letter. This Ninna Nanna is sung by the main character of the opera, Elizabeth, as a melancholy aria in a slow tempo with a light accompaniment by the instrumental ensemble. And I would like to
Carolina,
play.
I'm sorry I upset you. You upset me? Kindly mind your own troubles and don't try and poke your nose into those of others.
The correspondence shows that the librettist also had an influence on the musical character of certain passages, as in the case of a duet between Carolina, Countess of Kirstetten, and Dr. Reichmann, for which the two librettists suggest a duet in the style of Rossini. Oden wrote to Hans, "Dearest Hans, delighted to get your letter and to hear you are satisfied." The Dr. Gräfin duet in Act One, first act, "Blow Where It Will," this is an opera buffa alla Rossini. The passages of short lines in each stanza, that is tus, decai, etc., deal with male, etc., versification, etc., should be prestissimo and sound as if they were delivered without taking breath. Hence, indeed transforms the text into a duet explicitly inspired by the formal conventions of early 19th century Italian melodrama through the triple repetition of Reichmann's verse, followed by Carolina's verse, and then the clustering of the two at the end. It culminates, supported by the full ensemble of winds and percussion, in a man mano accelerando and crescendo. I want to yeah, okay.
Blow our trumpets, for if we don't, no. Come, let us blow our trumpets, for if we don't, no one will.
Now I understood why.
Come, let us blow our trumpets, for if we don't, no one will. And it will, the spirit blows in vain, until it finds a healthy human being. Finds a body's but my body's pain. A mortal poet needs a doctor's aid. Tooth decay, muse away, blood pressure drops, infection stops. Upset tongue, no images come. Kidney infected, diction infected, joints rheumatic, rhythm erratic, skin too dry, form awry, muscle tense to sets, irregular moves, inspiration. Went into the muse has been my mission by keeping him in physical condition.
Young the poet cannot earn his bread, and someone has to give it him instead. Then when he triumphs, someone kills me, must pay the burden of his woe, I deal with male rats in jail or ladies in the loony bin. Answer pests who make requests for a definition of man's condition. Then worse, hundreds of verse, big and slim, inscribed to him. In the lots and affliction of some lonely skeptic about his friend. Without me, of a genius and a rhyme, it would be right in letters all the time.
The poet dies, his glory does not end. For commentations in a swarmy sent by syllable by syllable, like fuss. They add allocate the big distance, specification, punctuation, vowel and place, which is on a placement. The role he gives to demonstratives is liking for bad metaphor and all the tables, the dark symbols, one is back to the sun, the man, looking back to the day of his life, but the cross discover how he was another. No one thanks in essays or reviews the servants of the servant of the muse.
From this example, we have seen how Henze took seriously the suggestions by Oden and Kalman, but Henze, for his part, often demanded textual abridgments and changes, which the librettists did not always completely accept. For example, Henze preserved to replace the Edelweiss, the flower that, so this flower is very important in the opera, and that it is the flower that was to be picked by the two young lovers. And hence, I would wanted to replace this flower with another rare alpine plant or flower or root. And in a letter, Hence wrote, Dear Winston and dear Chester, more and more the Edelweiss appears to me as a little too bitty and unhappy a choice, and I think this comes from what all Germans and Austrians have. We have grown up with tasteless songs and stories about this plant, and it means something rather obvious and too much used in musical comedies and the silly folky songs and stories. As a matter of fact, from this plant, no music comes to my mind. I think everything would be easier and better if you could think of a mysterious and very rare alpine plant, flower, or root which one could find in a book of biological science. This will give more magic and mystery to the whole subject. I have not got such a book with me. Otherwise, I would have found out for myself and given you some proposals. At the end, the two librettists didn't accept this opinion by Anselm. So these examples made clear how the three authors somehow influenced each other and constructed the libretto and composition together. Let us now turn to look to how the three authors work for the second opera, The Bastards, based on the tragedy Bacche by Euripides. In particular, I quote a few passages to reflect on how Oden, Kalma, and Hense adapt classical Greek tragedy into a modern opera. Very often discussed topic in their correspondence concerns the title of the opera. Bassarides is the title of a lost tragedy by Aeschylus, but it also a term that generally referred to the male and female participants in the procession of the god Dionysus. On the advice of the philologist Eric Roberts Dodds, um, he was also a friend of the librettist. The three authors chose Bassarides or Bassariden in German as the title, perhaps to distance themselves from Euripides' tragedy and to make it clear that this was a reinterpretation of Euripides' Bacche. Hense was not immediately convinced by the choice. He had not been able to find anyone in his friendship circle who had ever heard this name. Later, however, Hense was also convinced of this choice. Hense's library, which was donated to the University of Paderborn by the Hans Werner Hense Foundation and can now be viewed in the library there, shows how many texts on ancient Greek culture and the myth of Dionysus Hense owned and read. Hense's letter confirm of his reading. In one letter, for example, Oden writes as follows: I did not expect you to be able to read the Greek text, but I think you may find both the introduction and the notes helpful. Oden had actually sent a back edition to Hense, and it is in Hense's library. It's a volume of the Bacche in Greek with an ownership entry by Winston U. Oden, introduced and annotated in English by the philologist and friend of Oden, Eric Dodds. The plot of the opera is based quite closely on Euripides' tragedy, but some elements undoubtedly suggest an escape from antiquity into a historical no man's land. This is a quotation from Karl Dahlhaus. One means of this evasion is the juxtaposition of the different historical epochs, which is suggested by the costumes. For example, the librettist explain in this letter, Dionysus must appear before the curtain in tails and maybe opera hat and black cloth. He must speak about himself in contemporary terms, as in contemporary prose, addressing a contemporary opera audience. The speech must be suave, contemptuous, ironic, and menacing. The audience must be scared themselves. After this first appearance of Dionysus, he dresses in various costumes, hence he writes in this autobiography. Thus, Dionysus appears at the beginning as a blasé adolescent, dressed in the gloom, open skirt, and narrow pants of a Byron at a picnic in the Romagna. And in the final scene, at his victorious farewell, he comes on stage dressed up à la manière du Beau Brummel, with an intricate tie, monocle, and lorgnette. 10 months before the Salzburg premiere of the Bassaritz on 6 October 1965, Henze announced that he had completed its composition. He was not in a position to judge it, but was happy to have completed a demanding work for which he could only thank God. In this letter, Henze complained about the opening motto of the opera, Die Mitlog, which is taken from a poem by the German poet Gottfried Benn. It is the last line of a stanza from the poem Verlorenes Ich. Hence explains that it was not pleasant for an anti-fascist like himself to associate his own name in any way with that of Ben, who, although a great poet, supported Hitler's rise. He therefore asked, albeit in vain, to be allowed to add another quotation to the enigmatic three words the myths lied, to which only 3 points of omission were added right next to them. From these insights in the correspondence, we can say that the letters offer an intimate perspective on the creation of the two operas and a direct view into the motivations, sometimes conflicting opinions, and mutual influences that led to the development of the librettos and the compositions of the work. In conclusion, I would like to summarize the potential of a digital edition of correspondence for musicological research in light of the aspects discussed so far. Encoding postal documents permits to distinguish entities, assigning identifiers to persons, works, places, organization, documents, letters, which thus become easily traceable. In this way, it's possible to filter, to search, and to link work, person, and topic-related data. It permits to compare various documents and entire correspondences which are separated in the physical archive. It permits to reconstruct and analyze the chain of communication between two or more authors and consider several correspondences in parallel at the same time, as in the case of the correspondence between Oden, Kalman, and Henze. It can account for missing documents and integrate them into the correspondence. It permits to develop a network knowledge between digital editions and digital databases, and between institutions such as accessible archives and private collections. In this sense, synergies, I don't know why it's very quick, this presentation, to consult the sources. So it permits to consult the sources that are available, open access, to be studied according to the various research questions, without a geographical limitation, although an internet connection is always necessary, and in an accessible way as far as possible. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions.